Welcome. We are here to celebrate the life and accomplishments of Joseph E. Canzani, president of the Columbus College of Art and Design from 1949 to 1995. For 45 years, President Canzani was committed to the development and success of CCAD. His life and work centered around the college. This gathering is truly a celebration. It will be sentimental, funny, at times outrageous, and always fun for us to remember and reminisce. First, I would like to introduce President Denny W. Griffith to make a few remarks about Joe.
Well, thank you for coming from near and from far to be here with us today. It's nice to think about a service like this as being, of course it's got some sorrow as the back note, but to have it be joyful and to see the smiles on those faces. Just, you know, it's amazing how the world does turn, because there were some really weird looking sideburns I saw up there that we're starting to see on our students again. I think that might have reassured Joe somehow, I don't know. But on the subject of joy, Joe had a great deal of joy, as I think everybody in the room knows. He loved this place. He loved the building blocks of art and design, and he hammered it into many of us in the room, and he hammered it into the bones of the school in a way that we've never left it. He's the only man I ever knew that could talk about circularity. He's the only man I ever knew. I can remember coming to a dedication event when the dorm was named after Mel Schottenstein, and Joe talked a good 20 minutes at that event about yellow, because he could. And because he believed in it that much. Joe loved this place. He loved people. He occasionally loved a really good fight. He loved so much because he believed so deeply and so passionately in the work that we do. And the best thing that any of us could ever hope for is a life that is lived as richly and as deeply and as transformatively as Joe Canzani's life was. It's just hard to imagine somebody with bigger shoes than that guy. So I just want to say how humbled I am every day when I walk into the door of this building with his name on it. The responsibility that he created for all of us to steward his legacy, and certainly to me personally is one that I don't take lightly. And so I want to thank you for being here with us. Thank you for sharing some memories of his extraordinary life with us today, and just let our hearts fill up with this guy, because there are a lot of fabulous stories we're about to hear. So thank you.
Trying to check and see the safest place to stand when lightning strikes, because it's about to. Can't believe I was roped into this. But wait, President Canzani's heyday was during the 60s, 70s, and 80s. It was a time of condemned art school buildings, of shop-built furniture, of Franklin University threats, of triangularity, and of Frank Sinatra.
Let's forget about tomorrow. Let's forget about tomorrow. Let's forget about tomorrow, for tomorrow never comes. No money, forget the money. Let's live for now, and anyhow, who needs the money?
Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. He's our special honoree. Canzani, President Canzani, led the art school to become Columbus College of A&D. Born in Italy, rarely said CC. When he lectured, he left you in a quandary. Yes, Canzani, Joe Canzani, where you stood with him was never a guarantee. We were just the bourgeoisie hanging from his color tree in dizzying circularity. Canzani, we admired our 45-year king. We respected him and kissed his ring. Whoever heard of such a thing? Canzani. Okay, everybody. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. Come on. Don't forget about Canzani. He's our special honoree. One more time. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. He's our special honoree. Here you go. Okay, next to speak is Jeff Fisher, Senior Vice President and CFO.
Good morning, everyone. You know, it was, I remember years ago my interview with President Canzani. Many of you probably recall the small house on Hutton Place behind the museum. In fact, there was a picture of it on the board earlier. It was the old offices of the president. Well, a woman greeted me at the door and took me around the corner into what was probably a living room at one time, and there was a hand-built wooden desk sitting behind it was President Canzani. She, rather than leaving the room, then moved around to the other side of the desk and sat down next to President Canzani. I thought, wow, this is quaint. He has her taking dictation for him. I was so wrong, as I soon found out. She was, of course, Miss Kinney, the vice president of the college. The interview was really more like an hour-long conversation between the three of us, guided by Joe. We talked about a wide variety of topics. He was reading me. He wasn't so concerned with how many other jobs I had or what kind of number facts I could spew out at him, all the conventional accounting stuff. He wanted to know what I was about and how my mind worked, what made me tick, so to speak. It was like no other job interview I had been on. We talked and talked. I left there thinking to myself, what an interesting, charismatic man. I'd be lucky to work at this place. 25 years later, I'm standing here honored to have worked with him. I earned his trust over time, and he let me do my job. In return, it was part of my job to understand what his goals and objectives were and support him. Those goals and objectives were straightforward and really very simple. He was singularly focused on the education of a student as an artist. Since Joe's passing, I've continued to check back with the online guest book. I was struck by the very specific things people can recall: his phrases, his humor, his passion. He was not written about in general terms with the typical condolences. Memories of him were vivid and specific to him, to his words and events. He impacted so many lives. He was not halfway or mediocre in anything, nor did he accept it from others. One former student wrote, "Joseph Canzani was a catalyst forcing the mediocre to become exceptional," end quote. Joe wanted greatness because he believed everyone had greatness in them. If you pushed just enough, pulled at the core, kept sight of the vision, greatness would come out. And to be honest, that singular focus was sometimes tough for all of us to deal with. Another alum went on to write, "It was not easy to please him. He was a real perfectionist, as every artist should strive to be," end quote. I think that was part of his effectiveness. We all knew when he was genuinely pleased and when he was not so pleased. Joe retired 13 years ago, but our relationship didn't end. It changed and grew in a new direction. I learned more about him on a personal level. We talked about his immigration to the U.S. from Italy, his youth, his parents, and 2 brothers. We talked about his studying at Pratt, his Army Band years, the influential people he played with, such as Nelson Riddle in the Army Band, and of course his love of family, music, and painting. Until the end, he was still living independently in the house he designed in Rush Creek, a place where when you walked in, you immediately felt Joe's strong aesthetic sensibilities. He had a studio space in the side of the kitchen where he painted. In the early part of his retirement, we met every other Tuesday for lunch. I would pick him up and take him and Mary to his favorite Italian place, Da Vinci's. Afterwards, I would stop back at the house and see what he was working on in his studio. We talked a lot. As happens with age, he started to have more physical issues. Our lunches didn't happen as often, but we continued to see each other. The hardest part for Joe, and me too, was the steady decline in his eyesight. Those eyes, which had so much love, color, line, design, were failing him. But do you think that stopped him? No. He continued to paint, finding creative ways to solve his challenges he was facing. He was using magnification loops in front of the canvas, more light, larger photo reference, anything to help keep him painting. He needed 3 different pairs of glasses with different prescriptions to see at different lengths, which frustrated him but did not stop him. He was still not giving up, but he had to keep painting. I was still bringing him photo reference right up until the past spring. He was 92 years old and still painting. To me, this was Joe, passionate, determined, and creative. He was a mentor and a friend. Over the years, being in this arts environment, I've listened as different people talk about who and what they think an artist is. We all know there are many varied answers to this question. Some have said one is first a painter, or a musician, or singer, or dancer, or writer by profession, and only know if they are an artist later if what they have done resonated with people in some way, affected people. If this is true, I think Joe was an artist in so many ways, and he will be resonating with me for many years. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff. I did also want to mention that the bouncing ball sequence was thanks to Charlotte Belland and Palmer Patterson. So let's thank them. Next, I'd like to introduce Vincent Canzani, Joseph Canzani's son.
I don't know if I can follow Richard. I was thinking maybe we should nominate him for American Idol. I'm honored to have the opportunity today to address CCAD on behalf of my father. My father dedicated his life to the success of this institution, its faculty, and students. He lived by the simple principle of truly striving to be the best. Throughout his lifetime, he consistently challenged himself to achieve perfection. Even as a child of 11 in Italy, he had the reputation for being the best at catching sparrows. It might have been against the law, but he had to be the best. At the age of 15, he built this magnificent coach in front of the podium here for the Fisher Body Coach Building Contest and took top prize in the nation for woodworking after a nationwide competition. The state of Ohio winner was built by the Amish and is on display in the Amish Museum. During his high school years, he was selected to attend the prestigious Admiral Farragut Academy, and where he was so fiercely competitive that he won the top student academic award every semester. Upon his graduation, the school changed the rules for academic awards so that no one student could win the trophy for top student consecutive semesters. He was also an excellent musician. He played clarinet on radio in New York at the age of 19, and before joining the service, cut 3 albums. During World War II, he was the only musician to be retained from the original Army Band and reassigned to play with the world-renowned Glenn Miller Band when they joined the Army. After the war, he attended and graduated from Pratt Institute of Art and earned his Bachelor of Fine Arts degree, and then came to Columbus to earn his master's degree. After a short time working as a freelance illustrator, he joined the faculty of a little-known school then named the Columbus Art School. The school at that time was part of the Columbus Art Gallery as it was known then. The dean had just resigned and the school was in decline. The director of the gallery recognized something special about my father and offered him the job. He went home that night and after discussing the idea with my mother, returned the next day and agreed to take the job on an interim basis. He said he would stay long enough to help find a successor or someone more suitable for the position. It took 46 years. That was the beginning of his extraordinary success in building this institution into the world-class institution it is today. Throughout the years of its growth, under his tireless leadership and dedication, he never asked for or expected any personal reward for the school's success. Year after year, decade after decade, he inspired, expected, and sometimes demanded countless students and faculty to be the best. But he also knew that being the best was not enough. He expected his students and faculty to be the best and unique. Joe Canzani, my father, truly was and would expect nothing less of all of you to be the best and unique. Thank you.
Thanks, Vincent. Next, we'd like to invite Larry Bode, professor in visual communications, to come up and say a few words.
It was pretty scary up here. I've been teaching here for 34 years, and when I came down here, like I said, I was nervous as I'm nervous as a Jayhawk right now. But my personal story begins with meeting the president in 1969 when I was a freshman taking his color class. At that time, Mr. Canzani was known Dean Canzani, and he was the only one that taught the color class at that time. This class met in the gallery auditorium and was a first introduction to the principles of color. Back then, I was much younger and as nervous as any other student who had not had the challenge of taking this particular class. Dean Canzani was a very intimidating person when you first saw him walk into the gallery, wearing always his gray suit and hat. And that was his favorite color, I found out. Then shortly after arriving, he would remove his hat and jacket and roll up his sleeves. Now, meanwhile, Jeff Link and Dan Blanchette, who assisted President Canzani or Dean Canzani, placed the homework on and gave it to him for reviewing. Now, there was this infamous rack that was placed on the auditorium stage for the students who had achieved in solving the problem for that week. Although there was another placement of the students' works that did not meet the criteria of that week's project. And that's when Dean Canzani would look at that work and didn't achieve in solving a problem, and some of these pieces of artwork actually were flung across the auditorium stage. Now, it was quite terrifying to watch your homework assignment being flung like a 1/8-inch Frisbee. Yet jaws would drop and eyes were wide in motion as they would witness someone's work flying midair. Now, the artwork that made it to the rack was the envy of most of us, but it was also the lesson that we were waiting for, and that was the answer to that week's problem. Now, after the work made the rack, the class would then begin. Information was shared and was told why it worked and why others didn't. It was scary and refreshing at the same time. Dean Canzani would relate artwork to music. Being a musician himself, he would explain about tempo and beats, and that in art there's pattern and rhythm that is to be found. He would share his love of words. He would tell us that, like words, there's so many solutions in every problem. Probably one of the biggest recollections I can recall is that he used to say less is more, just don't over-design it. Now, my first problem in color, I received an F+. Dean Canzani did tell me why I got that grade. He told me the color was too blue, but he said, I gave you a plus because your technical application of the gouache and presentation. I still have it, by the way. Now, when all is said and done, some may have wanted to leave the school with that grade alone, but it's more like that. Dean Canzani was a man who left a legacy in seeing, feeling, thinking about many ways of doing art. Not to settle, not to complicate, and not to give up. This is what's kept me going and allowing me to have the honor to work side by side with President Canzani's last years in teaching at CCAD. I guess it's not that F+ that kept me going, but it was his passion of art in his own words, music, and thoughts that gives me the passion. Thank you.
Gray being the school color, I wore the gray suit and the somewhat not brilliant enough gray tie. And several of us, including me, we even colored our hair to match that. It wasn't supposed to be funny. Okay, next I'd like to introduce Stu McKissick, professor in visual communications and coordinator of the Department of Illustration. Stu?
Well, like a lot of you have said here today, Joe Canzani was both inspirational and terrifying. At least he was to me. I was one of these people that was hired to teach right after I got out of school, and you always feel a certain amount of, I don't know, guilt and trepidation. Are you worthy? And I was scared to death of him, frankly. Never felt like I was going to be good enough or able to measure up. So shortly after I started teaching, my car died. I think I sold it to Danny Hinty with the transmission in the trunk. Dan's here. And John Swindell, who was also teaching here, said, hey, Joe's son Vincent has recently joined the Navy, and he's got a car to sell, and I need a car too. Let's go up and look at it. Joe said we could come up and check it out. This was like on a Saturday afternoon. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm going to go to his house. So we went up to his house, and it was this beautiful place up in Rush Creek, and we went inside, and the first thing I was struck by was that, in fact, it looked just like the art school. Everything was Joe's vision, and everything in his life had to be just so. So we proceeded to sit down, and he gave us some drinks and some fruit. And for the next, it seems like it might have been about 2 hours, perhaps memory doesn't serve so well, but it was certainly an hour, he proceeded to tell me the story of his life, as we've heard recounted by Vince and some other people. He was very proud of that coach, which was in a, as I recall at the time, a plexiglass cube sitting in the living room and explaining to me how he made it. He told me intimate details that, frankly, here I was such an outsider and so afraid, I thought I wouldn't be comfortable telling people this. He went on, and with his usual flamboyance and passion. Now, I know one of the reasons people asked me to talk here today is because, like a lot of people around here, we all used to imitate Joe Canzani. Because it wasn't the fact that he had an Italian accent, that alone wouldn't do it. It was the flamboyant nature of the way he talked. And I always thought he put this on for a class, you know, to kind of rev things up. But one of the things I discovered this afternoon is that he was always like that. He was always that passionate. I don't think he was capable of putting on a show. He was the show. It was him. At one point, while we're sitting there, there's this loud racket, this noise, blah, 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 that starts coming around the corner, and he gets this horror-struck look on his face. And he goes, Vasa, Vasa, what in the hell is that racket? And all of a sudden, around the corner comes his granddaughter, Maria, on a big wheel. Do you remember those plastic orange and yellow big wheels? Probably very collectible now on eBay. And he looks at it, and he's horror-struck, and he goes, oh my God! Get rid of that thing and get her a real tricycle! And then, almost without missing a beat, he looks across into the kitchen where there is a high chair with a kind of a paisley covering on. He goes, "And that thing! Get it recovered! It's ruining my house!" Absolutely true story. And then without missing a beat, he turned right around and began to tell me again about, and as I walked out of there that day, and I just asking Vince because I don't remember what the car was. But we walked by it and Joe goes, "Oh yeah, the car, you don't want to buy that." I hope you sold it eventually. And I swear to you that's all true. And the thing that I learned from that was, first of all, I was no longer quite as afraid of him. I always was a little afraid of him. But I was never quite as afraid of him because he'd shown me a very human side. And I also realized that he wasn't making things up. I don't think, at least from my experience, he was capable of being dishonest. So I'm sure that's what sometimes made a lot of people a little intimidated or nervous around him, because he told you what he thought. And sometimes that wasn't pleasant. In the bathroom in my office, I still have a photograph of him in this pose, ready to fling a piece of artwork. He has a big smile on his face because he knew we were taking it of him and he was putting on a little bit of a show for us. So I'm super proud, like everybody here, to have had him as a part of my life. I don't ever sit down and color in one of my silly little drawings. I don't ever think about color that I don't think of Joe Canzani. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Stu. Next, we've got Nanette Hayakawa, who is in academic support here at the college and has been for a number of years, and Hiroshi Hayakawa, who is an assistant professor in media studies.
Well, we're going to talk about Mr. Canzani.
Yeah, go right ahead.
Well, you have to help me.
Yeah.
Okay. In 1979, I was hired, and Mr. Canzani and Miss Kinney hired me, and I never thought that their relationship was strange at all. I always really respected them, and I mean that sincerely. You know, they worked together, and they were just a good pair. You know, she was curriculum and he ran the school, and you have anything to add about?
Well, I didn't have a chance to actually sit in the class he taught, so that's, my only regret. But I was one of the last students who graduated in year 1995. That's the last year he was a president of the school. So that still holds a very special place in my heart. And I was at the portfolio day yesterday reviewing students' artwork and talking to their parents. And it was kind of interesting to hear people asking me about CCAD's job placement rates. And some student, circle the department of the choice. They want to get in and they want to major. Then ask me about what department will give you the most jobs that's really good and get paid well. And when I listen to those things, and one thing that this school and Mr. Canzani, embodied as being an artist, practicing artist and teacher, was the art making is a lifelong thing. You are not in art to just get a good job, because you have to be versatile and well-rounded artist. So that's the kind of thing that CCAD and he taught me from being here and feeling his presence, walking around, eating something in the cafeteria and saying hi and just little chat. And so I didn't directly learn by being in his class, but there are other things that really taught me just being here. So I think that's one of the legacies I still have in my heart, and something that I like to stress to my students, because nowadays people are after a quick buck and instant gratification. And that's kind of the thing that, yeah, I understand that because it's tough economy and everything, but CCAD's legacy is to create and educate the well-rounded artist. And I truly believe that's one of the things that sets CCAD apart from the other institutions.
And Mr. Canzani taught the overall process of art making. There were people from even before when I started here, there were those Larry Rabies and Larry Raby and Jeff Raymond, where back in the 60s, you were taught how to construct the canvas. And that time period, you recycled whatever you had. It could be a bed sheet. And all of that was Mr. Canzani's philosophy. You recycled, you used found object. Those were the things that he taught. And the process of making the art is, you can look at his work and see how he stressed that. Also, my office was always across the hallway from the board meetings. This was way back in the 80s. And I can remember Mel Schottenstein, always such a good friend to Mr. Canzani. Funny, fabulous person. Liz Galbraith, Loanne Crane, and the Honorable Judge Robert Duncan was on our board, and Sharon Cohen was his first development officer, and like Truman Capote had his swans, well, Sharon Cohen was Mr. Canzani's swan. And she put us on that right track, And whenever anybody, when they were ready to quit, and that sometimes happens, he would call some of us into the office and he'd say, well, Nanette, who's doing the most work? Who's working? Who's really working for the school? And you tell him, and I guess that's why Tom Green is the director of admissions and the deans were the deans. And back then we didn't have chairs. We just had the deans. So they did all the work. Yeah, and I'm so proud to be a part of the school and all of the alumni that I just dearly love. And I'm moderately confused right now. Jeff Stoller. One thing, he always knew who he could trust. And I think that when we didn't have a president there for a while, I think that's why he chose Jeff Fisher and Dr. Lathy, because they held it together until we had Denny, and now it's in Denny's hands. And he always wanted an East Broad Street address, and now we have that. And so we thank Denny for that. Thanks.
Thank you, Nanette and Hiroshi. Next speaker is really a longtime friend of the college and somebody I remember working with when I first started here a very long time ago. And it's great that she came today to just tell you a little bit about how it was quite a while ago. And that's Sue Miller, and she is the former director of admissions. Sue?
Good morning. I have quite a few stories to tell you. I began my career at CCAD approximately 1967, around there. And I was hired as the receptionist and secretary. My office was in 486 Hutton Place. Beautiful, quaint home that was broken up into many, many offices. My desk sat right next to the window, and I could look out, and I could see Joe's office. Every morning, he and Mary would come in about 8:30, 9 o'clock, and I would tap on the window, and I would wave or nod. And at first, they weren't too sure how to take me. Took a while, but after a while, when I would catch his eye, I would get the morning nod. First milestone. The building at 486 Hutton Place was filled with the most wonderful people I think I have ever worked with. There was, in the front office was Lance Cohen, who was the administrative whatever. I'm not sure about titles. I never was big on that. Behind me was Mrs. Wiseman, our bursar, and back then there was a financial aid person. On the right-hand side of the building was the records office, registrar, Stu Spahn, Myra. In the back, I was blessed to have people such as Don Conkle, Al Orcutt, and my beloved Frank Hoffelt. It was a wonderful time. Very small building. You cannot imagine how much we put into that building and what all went on in that building. It was truly an experience. Well, my intentions at CCAD were to stay, maybe about a year and then go on for my master's. Somehow, Joe had this feeling or inkling maybe when people were thinking about leaving. And one day, he called me into his office and told me that he was thinking about hiring a fine arts faculty as director of admissions, and would I be interested in the assistant director of admissions. Folks, you have no idea what a milestone that was. I mean milestone. When you consider that Joe and Mary did absolutely everything as far as the interviewing of students, talking to them, I would take them around, but for Joe to give that up, truly, truly a remarkable thing to happen. Our first director of admissions was Rick Hickam from the Fine Arts faculty. He would teach full-time and then come into the office, and we would review portfolios and travel all over the state of Ohio for college nights and things like that. Rick stayed for, I cannot tell you how many years, I'm not sure, and then he moved on. And then, first lesson learned here, Joe called me into his office and told me that he was going to hire another fine arts faculty person to be director. And to be very honest with you, and I will be, I was quite surprised, stunned, whatever the word might be. And I always thought that there was a conspiracy between the Fine Arts Division and Joe Canzani. Wherever Lowell is, I'm sure he had something to do with that. I'm just kidding, Lowell, really, I am. I'm not. Well, our second director of admission was Jack Mann, and he also taught and reviewed portfolios. We had a wonderful time. It really worked out well. It tremendously did. I want to tell you one of the experiences I had. Trying to talk Joe into some things was a challenge. In the 70s, portfolio days were beginning to become prominent, and I always used to say, you know, Joe, we really need to go to these portfolio days. Oh, Sue, I don't know if we should do that, you know. Well, after much persuasion and talking, he decided it might be a good idea if we did start attending these portfolio days. So I remember the first one I went to, and I believe it was at Pratt. I would lug up my portfolio with all the artwork and the slide projector and all that, the catalogs. And I went to the first portfolio at Pratt, and this is no reflection on personnel from the East Coast. But I must tell you, the reception that I received, or their thoughts, were their conception was that the Columbus College of Art and Design was nestled in the middle of Nebraska. And we couldn't possibly know anything about art or how to produce it, let alone have a college. That was until I would bring out the artwork, the slideshows, the catalog, and then it became a different story. We were really flocked with students who were interested in knowing what was going on, how we did it, what the curriculum was, everything. And before I went to these portfolio days, Joe would always tell me, Sue, don't tell them any secrets about the school. I have to admit, to this day, I'm not sure what secrets he was referring to. But needless to say, I did not reveal a thing. There was the time, one of the portfolio days, that admissions personnel or faculty would come up to me and say, could you give us some insight into this work that you have on color? Or any curriculum that you can give us. And I thought, uh-oh. I would look at them and I would say, well, I'm just the director of admissions, but I can tell you, I'll tell you as much as I can about this color course. It's time consuming and it's difficult. And that would be it. But when I came back from the portfolio days or college days, Joe would relish talking about what the other schools were doing, what was my impression of them, what did they think. He was always interested in that. And my observation of many of the art schools back in the 70s, despite their reputation, we were just as good, if not better. And they knew it, and they didn't know how, the other art schools didn't know how to accept this. But I must admit, there was a great deal of very, very much proud of what we did and how we did it. After Jack left, which again, I cannot remember the time span on how long Jack was here, there was no conversations as far as who was going to be the director of admissions. One of the reasons I was told when the first decision was made was, first lesson learned again, I didn't know you wanted it. Second lesson learned was, you didn't ask for it. All true. So the lesson that I learned, and learned well, is if you want something bad enough, you apply for it or you go after it. So when Jack left, there was no discussion. I did become director of admissions. I want to tell you there is no way to describe the fabulous time I had here. It was a tremendous part of my life. Joe was frustrating to me at times. The man was phenomenal. Special. He cared tremendously about the students. The college is about the students. It's not about the faculty, the staff. It is about the students, and he knew that. He knew that. He relished the students. He loved the students. He would open his door to any student who would talk or wanted to talk about color, design, whatever. Back then, we were many things to many students. Guidance counselors, mothers, room decorators, room inspectors, whatever. But it was a good time. We had a wonderful time. It was a great experience. And I want you to know that I'm sure the faculty and staff know this, and I'm sure I hope the students know it. You are working and going to the finest art school in the country. Joe's dream has become a reality. There's a lot to be said about the expansion. I really cannot believe it when I come visit here. It is tremendous. It pays a lot of tribute to your administration, your faculty, and your staff. The growth is fantastic, and I'm quite proud that I became a part of it and will never forget the times I had here. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sue. Now, since Sue mentioned the year that she came, 1967, there were several other people that came in 1967. Todd Slaughter. I was here in 1967, started. And a friend of mine also started in 1967, former Dean of Fine Arts, and now Fine Arts Professor Emeritus, Lowell Tolstead.
Thank you, Richard. Sue Miller, you were 67? God, you're older than I thought. Jesus, I see her in the grocery store all the time, and I'm thinking I should help her. Well, that brings up 67. 67 was the year I came, and I flew into Columbus on a DC-3, literally, for the interview from Iowa. And I got a cab from the airport to the Christopher Inn, and for the interview with Mr. Canzani. And when I went in for the interview, I only remember 3 words: quality, discipline, and fundamentals. And I think I heard those same 3 words probably for the next 38 years. So that was his message in that time, and I think I went to with Canzani to a lot of interviews with when we were hiring new faculty for the Fine Arts Division, and I heard the same spiel every time, and I think it was a really important one for me, and I kind of took it to heart in my own artwork also to push that kind of thing. So my only thing about Joe Canzani, I always called him Mr. Canzani, I never called him Joe in my whole time here, is out of respect mainly, but I always thought of him as Woody Hayes. Because I remember when I was at Iowa, I only went to one football game, and that was against Ohio State. And I saw Woody Hayes with his sleeves rolled up on the sidelines, kind of hollering at the players. And it reminded me of that, of Joe Canzani. But Joe, I think really, he was I was going to say the Woody Hayes of college art, but I think it's the other way around. I think Woody Hayes is the Joe Canzani of football. And so what can I say that can define the impact that Joe had on me and probably countless others? I can only say that this influence was profound, and I'm grateful to have known and worked with him.
Thanks, Lowell. I sort of remember my interview with President Canzani and Mary Kinney. Took me to lunch I stayed at the Seneca, which was a scary place, and we had lunch at the Christopher Inn, and I smoked at the time, and I had brought cigarettes, and And I brought a book of matches with me from a paper and print and design show. It had a really interesting pattern and logo on it. And I don't know that I ever ate or we ever had our coffee or anything. We spent the entire hour and a half talking about the design of that book of matches, which was kind of nice, you know, and it was better than lunch, I think. Now I'd like to introduce a liberal arts professor, Margaret Armbrust, also a longtime CCAD friend.
I can't believe I'm going to read this in Canzani Hall. This is where the lightning comes, I'm sure. Lowell, will you hold some foil over my head? At the beginning of my second year as a faculty member at CCAD, way back in the early 1970s, I was called by Mr. Canzani and told to come an hour early for the general faculty meeting to make the coffee. It's the truth. It's the truth. My lack of cooking skills was legendary, and my first attempt with a broiler turned out to be chicken leg a la fire department. My approach to cooking was do not pass go, do not turn on the burners, the broiler, or the oven. Go directly to the nearest carryout and apply where needed. If anyone wanted to come to my place for dinner, I would ask my guests to 1, consult a spiritual director, 2, make a new will, and 3, increase their insurance. So naturally, I asked why I'd been chosen to make coffee for the administration and faculty. His response was, because you're the only girl on the faculty. I knew full well that one dared not decline such a command, but what Mr. Canzani didn't know, probably because I never burned any of my undergarments in public, was that I was not only a culinary school dropout, I was also a feminist. So I came an hour early and was confronted with a 30-cup electric percolator. I looked at that mysterious object and had no clue what to do with it. I knew that if I made the coffee too strong, it would burn everybody's stomach, but might be consumed by watering it down. So I created what may have been the weakest coffee in the Western Hemisphere, perhaps even the weakest coffee in the history of the world. All the men arrived an hour later and lined up for coffee. It was really awful, and they hated it to the appropriate degree, demanding to know who made this coffee. And I replied, I did. I came in an hour early just to make it for you. And they all said, don't ever let her make the coffee again. After more than 35 years, partly because that administration and faculty are mostly gone or retired, and not wanting to go to my own grave with this on my conscience, I stand before you in sound mind and body, without coercion and under no duress, to state in public for all to know that I made that coffee weak deliberately. I did it on purpose. And from that day to this, I am happy to tell you that I never made the coffee again. Even so, I must confess to something else that's equally true. I am not contrite, and I am not sorry. And should anyone ask me to come an hour early to make coffee simply because I am female, I would advise that person to read this document and consult a psychiatrist.
There is coffee and cookie after it. Margaret did not make the coffee. What we wanted to give you all some time to do was to reminisce a bit with us. So we've got an open mic here, and Lucy and and Palmer are going to be roaming the audience, waiting to hear some of your wonderful stories. about Joe. Any stories about President Canzani?
Good morning. I'm Chuck O'Connor, and I arrived on campus in 1958. And when I remember telling my parents that I wanted to go to Columbus Art School, my dad was very apprehensive about that. He said, well, how are you going to make a living? And he was reluctant to even come here and for the interview. But I remember he met Joe, and first of all, he looked at the exhibition, and he was just a little blown away. He said, wow, kids can do this work. But really what sealed the deal was talking to Joe. And I don't remember exactly what they said. It's all kind of a blur to me at the time. But whatever he said, my dad was like, this is a great place for you. You better do well. And so thanks to Joe and the great mentor he was, I feel I did. But I got to tell you one story. With a name like O'Connor and a president named Canzani, I was actually working for the school while I was here, working off the scholarship, as many of us that went here did. And so I painted his office and did all sorts of things and under his direction. So he knew me pretty well. And he never, because of my name, he never missed an opportunity to remind me that St. Patrick was Italian. So particularly around St. Patrick's Day, I heard this more than once. So one year, I was still a student at the time, I decided the best thing I could do to celebrate St. Patrick's Day that year was to paint the front door of Beaton Hall Kelly green. So we went out and bought a can of paint, and sometime around midnight, I coerced my roommate to come with me, and we painted that green, and we did a good job on that door. Now, remember, the door was always red. If folks that were around here back then, it was a red door. It was bright green on the morning of St. Patrick's Day. So I'm in class, and I don't remember which class I was in, and in storms Joe Canzani. No questions asked. He knew exactly who had painted that door. And he came in. It's like before he could say anything, I reached in my bag and I pulled up a can of red paint. I said, it's just for today, Mr. Canzani. He never mentioned again that St. Patrick was from Italy.
My name is Drew Robinson. Actually, my memories of Canzani were sort of this character that came out when we first got to school, and but this is less about me, more about my business partner, who I don't know where he is, and when I get back to the office, I'm going to choke him because I think he should be here right now. So I'm going to pretend like I'm him. Okay, that's my best imitation of him. Actually, no, he was struggling to get into the school financially, and he got a scholarship. And when it started to run out, he was going to have to leave the school. He did very well. I was a crappy student, and that I see some of the faces here. People who had me, Mr. O'Connor, Tolstead, and I'm sure you had me in class. But Dominic Larici, my business partner, was a stellar student. He was on Dean's list, and when he was having financial struggles, he just went and saw Canzani. They sat down and talked for, I don't know, maybe half hour, 45 minutes, and he reinstated his scholarship. And I think that is a good reflection of who he was and how much he cared about, the importance of continuing people's education. So I know Dominic would have wanted me to say this because it was instrumental in him getting his degree, and he was the only person in his family to get a degree. So Canzani just reinstated his scholarship for no other reason than he was, proud of Dominic's work, and Dominic was willing to work hard. So that's all I have to say.
I'm Bernie Stockwell. In 1955, I was a designer for Libby Owens Ford in Toledo, and I received a phone call from a former classmate of mine who went to Pratt with me, and he said, say there's an opening in the industrial design area in Columbus, and I knew you went there for 1 year and then went on to Pratt, and said, I'll give you his phone number. So he gave me Mr. Canzani's phone number, and I called him, and I tried to explain what I was applying for, and in our process of our conversation, I said, say, did you know somebody by the name of Victor Canzani who was teaching at Pratt? And Joe says, he was my brother. And I said, well, that was great, because he was a great guy, and I had some classes with him, and I'll never forget him. And Joe says, you got the job.
My name is Jack Hedge. I don't know if many of you know me, but I met Joe Canzani about 25 years ago. I'm an architect, and I met Joe. My firm was hired to design the dormitory, the Schottenstein dormitory. And actually, I'd done some designs for the thing, but my boss didn't take me to the meeting, you know. And I'd rendered the sky with some magic markers on the drawing, and my boss came back and said, Joe, loved the building, but he wants to work with you on your skies, Jack. Yeah, it was just such a delight to work with Joe because he cared about design. After that time, I worked with him on the design of the dormitory, the two little houses that we turned into his office. And I think the biggest honor was designing this building with Joe. But it was so funny. We worked with Joe and his sidekick Mary, always there. But we talk about things I never talked about with clients. You know, we had one discussion one day about design of a toilet and how bad they were and what should be done to design a toilet better. And an interesting time too is they thought Mary and Joe said, well, the tile in the dormitory has to be pure white, the vinyl tile, and pure vinyl tile is hard to get, the white. But they were to the point that it's not worth doing this dormitory, Jack, if we can't get white tile in that dormitory. You know, so it was just the fact that he cared so much about design and all of those things. I also had the honor to work with him on his house, which is a wonderful Usonian house in Rush Creek, and I designed the addition for Maria as she stayed there. And we had great times working on that house as we did some things. And the story is when the house was ready to go out to bid, we couldn't find a contractor to build it because houses, you know, housing contractors aren't that kind of people that build houses build out a block and things like that. So we had to bring the contractor out of retirement that had built all the houses in Rush Creek. And we had a meeting with Joe, and he says, well, you can't get cypress anymore, Joe, to do the wood trim around the house. And the next meeting we came back, and Joe says, I found a lumber yard in Cleveland that has the cypress. You're going to get cypress to build on this house. So it was, but the guy he just cared so much about, you know, what was going on. And as he was thinking about retiring, we were working with him, and he wanted to make sure that he left a legacy. He wanted to make sure that the students, you know, were still aware of the principles of design. And so he was designing stainless steel sculptures, which I think are right outside this building, of the circle, the square, and the triangle. He wanted to make sure that that was going to be passed on as a legacy, you know, to the students here. So I said, great man. And the last time I talked to him, and he used to call me after he retired, it was when the art sign went up here. And I told Denny this story. He called me and says, Jack, don't let anybody tell you that's sculpture. It's a wonderful sign, but it's not sculpture. So, but he was a great man to work with, and we're going to miss him a lot. Thanks.
My name is Joseph Gray. I graduated in 1950, and I lost a lot of sleep because Joe, no matter how great you thought your work was, Joe would always come around and say, well, you know, did you think about this? You know, you could have done this, you could have done that. Well, that carried through for 45 years in advertising, where I took my work home and I scratched my head and I said, there's got to be an answer to this. But Joe was wonderful. He was a friend. I'm going to miss him. In 49, and 50 rather, I was flattered. He asked me to be his assistant in color theory for the evening classes. I thought, my God, here's somebody who knows all about it. I don't know that about color, but he was great. I learned so much from him about color, which became part of my trademark. And I always remember he said, just think about it. Just think, can you do a little better? Can you do a little more? And that was Joe. Wonderful man. I miss him.
Okay, well, before we leave, there's going to be an AV presentation at the very end of this that you might want to see. It's very short, but it's of Joe. And in a class, painting and talking about his painting, and it's a wonderful moment. There is Margaret's coffee outside and cookies. Did you make the cookies too? Because warn us now. And there's a fantastic faculty show that you should stay and see. And just to round out the morning, do we have that cued? Can we do this once more as a group now, together? Do we have it? We don't have it. We have it. Okay, 1, 2, 3. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. He's our special honoree. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. Don't forget about Canzani. He's our special honoree. Okay, let's look at the AV, and thank you so much for being here and your wonderful words and thoughts.
I've yet to see one student that ever got angry with me because I was tough with them when I was trying to make them better. To really know, you have to feel it. You got to learn how to feel it, see? If you want to be good, there's no such thing as easier. It's a tough school, but it's good. That's what we wanted, a reputation. It's tough, but good. I'm just telling you a little bit of what's going through my mind. See, you gotta tell it the way it is.